Hey there, I'm Nark, a 3D weapon artist dedicated to modeling some of pop media's most iconic weapons and firearms, both real and fictional. And today, I'll be reacting to and modeling the guns seen in Peaky Blinders Season 1. Before we jump right into things, if you like the models you see me create here today and want them for yourself, as well as a ton of other weapon models and 3D game assets, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/NARKdesign and become a curator today for only $5 a month. Curators get access to a large and ever-growing catalog of original 3D model assets and their textures, as well as financially support the channel, so huge thanks to you guys. More on this later in the video. So with all of that out of the way, let's explore the streets of post-World War I Birmingham and see what iconic firearms we can spot to chat about and rebuild in beautiful 3D modeling glory. And there it is, the Webly MK6 Revolver, Tommy Shelby's personal sidearm for, I believe, most of the first half of the entire series. Which makes a ton of sense for the time period, right? Tommy Shelby and his brothers returned from World War I at the end of 1918, and this first season takes place in the year 1919. They're soldiers. They use the weapons they have experience with and feel comfortable with, a sidearm they can actually trust. And the Webly MK6 was issued to British officers in World War I, so definitely makes sense. Yeah, that is just such a cool scene to showcase the pistol. So essentially, for context, Tommy is preparing for battle here against a rival kingpin and his gang towards the end of the first season. So he takes out his Webly, he's got his thumb pulling that hammer back partially, so he's able to then rotate that cylinder freely, most likely just making sure the cylinder is loaded and everything looks good. But most importantly, one of the coolest little things I noticed when I saw this for the first time and when I rewatched it recently was that you can tell he takes a moment there to double check that the cylinder is kind of lined up to the top firing position, which is just very cool. Extra little detail, very cool. They don't show many other in-depth scenes of the Webly kind of like operating in Season 1 specifically, but regardless, I'll take the time here to mention a few other cool little key details about the Webly MK6. It's chambered in 4.55 and is a break-action revolver. So instead of what some might assume with revolvers where the cylinder would swing out on a crane to the left of the receiver to reload, the Webly has a lever on, or I guess maybe a latch, on the left side of the weapon that when pushed unlatches that top part of the frame from the other, I guess, bottom or back part of the frame, and they can break apart on that hinge down there, which gives you top-down access to the chambers of the cylinder, and it also will push up that kind of ejection plate and rod that's in the middle of the cylinder to eject any spent casings. But yeah, the Webly MK6, super cool historical firearm, makes total sense for it to be showcased in the show for the setting as well as being Tommy's original personal sidearm. So let's go over the modeling and see what we can do. All right, so like always, I start out by dropping in all of the reference images into plasticity that I'm able to source. Peaky Blinders is definitely known for its historical accuracy, and that extends to the guns for sure. Now, I always aim for realism in my modeling, but I'll be upfront, some dimensions will never be perfect. My focus is making these models look visually accurate and appealing. Basically, if it passes the Jonathan Ferguson smell test, so to speak, I'm a happy man. I kick things off with the Webly's barrel, since it has that distinctive kind of grooved, angled, slanted profile. I built a front view 2D profile and extruded it and then trimmed it back so it would flow into that front sight bump there and then slope naturally back down until it connects back to that kind of main part of the frame, which is really important since the Webly is a top break revolver and we have to make sure that the geometry we create here makes sense mechanically and really can animate properly, so there's nothing clipping or anything awkward like that. The challenge here was blending the barrel and frame with that kind of curved transition part, which I solved by lofting some profiles together and using them as cutting tools. The lower frame was more straightforward. It's pretty simple extrusions for the frame and also the trigger guard, and then just beveling some edges to clean them up. The trigger was the same deal. It was a 2D profile extruded, and then beveled that smooth edge to it. At this stage, the Webly was definitely starting to shape up, and it was noticeable as a Webly. Next, I tackled that kind of recessed plate that's at the back but internal part of the frame. And this is where the end of that cylinder's ejection rod and plate with the ratcheting teeth on it is going to sit, because within the plate and the recessed part of the plate in the frame is where there's going to be some smaller mechanical pieces in the real world thing that would cause that cylinder to ratchet and rotate. So pretty straightforward. Once I got it lined up, I was able to make that recess into the plate and the frame itself with a sphere, and we were good to go. Then I moved on to the cylinder itself, which definitely a little trickier than first expected. It's not just as easy as a plain cylinder extrusion with some detail cutouts. No, it had to align with both the bore of the barrel and fit into where that kind of extractor ratcheting mechanism I just talked about would fit into that back recessed plate. So it took me several attempts to get right, but once I finally got it, it really tied the whole thing together so far, and I was pretty happy to keep going on. I usually do a polish pass after finishing a trickier section, just like adding bevels or doing some edge work or tweaking some angles, whatnot, just to kind of like clear my mind while still making progress on the model before jumping back into another involved or intricate part. Speaking of which, the hammer was next. It's got that sharp, almost like spiked tip at the end of the striking face for the hammer, and that's so it can strike the primers on the cartridges. So first I just kind of started with a 2D profile for most of what the hammer is and extruded that, and then spent a lot of time trying different techniques, tweaking things, lofting things to get that kind of spiked part of the hammer just right, and eventually I got it, so I was good to go, and then I could add that other part of the hammer that your thumb would actually like rest on to pull back, which is just a bit smoother and a bit wider than the rest of the hammer, and we were all set. After that, I made that pretty basic little circular metal ring kind of loop on the bottom of the handle, and then moved on to more important details. Specifically, the rear sight piece that also doubles as the latch lever for the brake action. This part was pretty tough. There's some complicated geometry going on. I wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be any clipping or anything when animating a model like this. And I'll admit, mine isn't perfect. But after a lot of curve cuts and extrusions and lofts and a bunch of other stuff, I got close enough that it still looks like, or at least as recognizable as the real part on the real thing. So I decided to move on. From there, it was just a few finishing touches. So those grip panels, the hinge pieces, the front sight insert, and that little like winged triangle solid protrusion that's on the frame near the cylinder. I'm not exactly clear on what the purpose of this part is. I tried looking it up. I got a lot of different answers, so maybe you guys can let me know in the comments below, but I guess it could be anything from some sort of like metal solid cam piece for aligning the cylinder, or possibly a piece to keep the cylinder from hitting the bottom of a holster when someone holsters the revolver. But not exactly sure. Definitely let me know if you know what it's for. With the main build done, I added some smaller details like some screws and some of those hinging parts on the actual hinge, I suppose. And yeah, I called it a day and sent it to Substance Painter to do all my texturing and material work. And here's how the final Webly Mark 6 turned out. Overall, I'm quite happy with this one. I think I've done Tommy Shelby proud, recreating his personal sidearm in the series that he carries with him for quite a while before he upgrades to something else further in the series in the later seasons. Of course, there are some imperfections that stick out more than others. I think mainly for me, that latch lever that's part of that rear sight piece assembly, it just doesn't look exactly how it should, like on the real thing, but everything else all together, I think it's a pretty good final result, so I'm pretty happy with it. So before we head on to the next model, just a quick reminder, if you head on over to patreon.com/NARKdesign, for only $5 a month, you can get access to this Webly model, its textures, and a bunch of other models, and you financially support the channel. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. But regardless, let's move on to the next one.
Is there any man here named Shelby?
All right, so the introduction of not just Season 1's main antagonist, Billy Kimber, but also his personal sidearm, which is the FN Browning M1900 Pistol, showcased in a pretty slick way there with slow motion rays, and it's kind of an awesome scene and a very cool pistol. So it does still fit the time period. The FN M1900 was designed originally by John Moses Browning, which I'm sure at least some of you have heard of before. He's kind of considered one of, if not the most influential gunsmith and firearms engineer throughout history. Many innovations in small arms came from the brain of John Browning. And he originally designed this pistol in or around roughly 1896, to which the Belgian manufacturer FN Browning produced roughly until the end of World War I, funnily enough. It didn't see any adoption or issue for the British military, at least that I'm aware of, which, still makes sense for the character of Billy Kimber when you compare and contrast to Tommy Shelby's character and his sidearm we just went over. For the time, self-loading pistols were still relatively new, cutting edge, so it sort of implies that wealthy, high-end aesthetic for the character of Billy Kimber. I think it works. Part of me does wonder if they chose the FN M1900 because of the, I guess, myth that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which is sort of that breaking point to kick off the First World War, was done with an FN Browning M1900 pistol. But my understanding is that this is incorrect, and technically the assassination was carried out using a FN Browning M1910 pistol instead.
She's right, Why should all you men die? It should just be them who's caused it.
Nice, and how we can see here the FN Browning actually firing and hitting Tommy in that chest, or I think it's a shoulder area. You might even notice that this particular pistol, it actually fires from that bottom portion of the slide. That bottom cylindrical cutout is actually the barrel, where the top cylindrical section of the slide is where the recoil spring and guide rod would be. So I guess just think of the front of a M1911 and then just vertically reverse it. That's a good way to get the point across, I guess. Good time, I suppose, to mention that the M1900 is chambered in 32 ACP. So definitely possible for Tommy here in this scene to sort of take that bullet and not instantly be incapacitated, I guess, so to speak. Obviously, any bullet wound is not a good thing. I am not trying to imply that 32 ACP is a harmless round at all or in any way. I'm just pointing out in terms of stopping power, comparing the 32 ACP to the 4.55 round that Tommy's sidearm is chambered in. It's not unrealistic for Tommy to take that bullet in battle and then survive to get the bullet removed and properly recover and heal and all that, which he does do, and the show actually includes a scene of this later in the episode. I think I spoke quite a lot on this pistol and its place in the show, so let's just jump right into the modeling. All right, so with my reference images set up, I started blocking out the receiver, that bottom frame of the M1900. You'll notice I didn't model the full length right away, and that's because the frame has these kind of two thicker rectangular sections on either side, and I wanted to hold off on those until more of the major parts were in place. The slide was the next big piece then, and it's got some interesting geometry going on. Much like the Webly's barrel, I did take it in stages. So first I kind of modeled the portion of the slide that's more flat, rectangular, less complicated geometry. And then I modeled the front of the slide, which has the rounded portions that house the barrel and kind of recoil spring guide rod system. And then I finally connected them together and made all those curves and such transition and look nice. So with that all done for the time being, I then circled back and I added those thicker side chunky parts of the lower frame. Now here's where things get tricky. So the loading block, or I actually don't know what the part's called, but it's some sort of block that helps chamber rounds. Anyways, if you look at the cutout above the grip on the right side, you can actually see this piece on the real pistol. It's an internal block that rides with the slide, pushing rounds into the chamber as the slide cycles. It's got some pretty complex geometry compared to the other parts, but definitely an important part. So I started with a 2D profile of its rear, lots of kind of rectangular edges and rail cutouts, and extruded it forward to where it should sit, and then I extended it backwards an extra amount just so I could slice and Boolean cut the curves to match the slide and the frame. This way it sat flush against the rear of the pistol the way it should. Since it's a moving part, I had to go back and tweak the slide and frame proportions so there'd be no clipping during the animations later. But yeah, one detail I didn't notice at first, the rear iron sight is actually built into this same block piece. So once I had the geometry kind of originally done, I then added that back sight feature to this block with curves and extrusions and all that. With that aligned, I added the front sight to the slide so I could complete that sight picture. From there, I did a detail pass on the frame and barrel, and then moved to the grips. The side panels are more pronounced than I think I initially thought, thicker at the base, and they kind of taper towards the top. So I profiled, extruded, beveled, and then angled and rounded them a bunch to nail that subtle contour. As I mentioned when we looked at the Peaky Blinders footage earlier, the M1900 actually fires from the lower barrel position in the slide, so the upper cylinder housing is where the actual recoil spring and such would go. So I modeled the barrel and added a capped piece in the upper cutout to, I guess, represent the stop of where that spring assembly would kind of like face against. One part that gave me more grief than I think I expected were those angled, sort of ribbed wings that are at the rear of the slide. They're for gripping the slide easily to like pull it back or rack the slide or whatnot. It sounds simple, but getting them to look like natural or look how they should, it required a lot of edge work, routing, and cutting and all of that before they actually felt right. After that, it was the finishing touches. So all those little screws, rivets, the small little latch that's on the side of it here, which I think is the safety switch, though I can't say with certainty, as well as the magazine and the mag release system, which is that little kind of like panel latch paddle, I believe, that's at the very bottom and rear of the grip. Once all that was complete, I brought the model into Substance Painter for texturing. And from all of that work comes this final result and showcase of the FN Browning M1900 Pistol, showcased in Peaky Blinders Season 1. I think there are some components I could have gone back and put some extra time and effort into, mainly the detailing on those side panel grips, but making sure I didn't spend too much time on any single model since we've got 3 models to make and show for you guys in today's video. I think I scoped the modeling project well, and I'm happy with the result. But yes, I did just mention we are showing 3 models from Peaky Blinders here today, and we just finished up the second one. So no more waiting, let's jump into this last weapon from Peaky Blinders Season 1.
The boys dropped it to Charlie Strong's yard as agreed. They must have taken it from the proofing bay instead of the export bay.
Holy sweet baby of Mary.
Inside, we found 25 Lewis machine guns.
Holy sweet baby of Mary is right. Well said. So what we see in this scene is Tommy and 2 other members, or I guess associates of the Peaky Blinders, unloading a Lewis machine gun from a stolen shipment from the BSA factory, which not only is the sort of kind of major underlying plot of the first season, but also a very cool little historical or like setting accurate detail. So the BSA is the British small arms company. They manufactured a lot of machined and mechanical products, both civilian and military. Obviously, here we are focusing on the military part of that. And yes, from what I can gather from some light research, the BSA factory did at this time manufacture Lewis machine guns for the British government. And what we are seeing here is Tommy realizing the men he hired to rob the factory actually mistakenly stole the wrong crate. And now they have in their possession not just one, but quite a few stolen high caliber machine guns, which, as you can imagine, throws a lot of problems and troubles their way through the season. What a great action shot of the Lewis machine gun here. This is awesome. The dramatic slow motion firing scenes like help massively in showing you guys how it works and all that. So it's very cool. So yes, as you can see from that clip, the Lewis machine gun is a fully automatic, I suppose you could say, light machine gun, for lack of better terminology. It has this thick circular rotating drum that you can actually see in the footage kind of operate, and it has an exposed bottom to it, so there's no like floor or bottom plate to the drum, where the rounds that are like loaded into the drum are still visible. So when the weapon fires, the drum will rotate and then it will like drop a round into the receiver or the chamber when it's above that proper loading ready position, and then it will fire and then it will repeat.
Thorne, reporting for duty, sir.
You were saying something about being outgunned.
Nice, and another great shot of the Lewis machine gun from the show. That's very cool. It's being raised and readied for fire. And yeah, for this time in history, even just one guy having a Lewis machine gun during a gang skirmish or battle where everyone else is using handguns or manually operated bolt action rifles, that's certainly a proper gun to change the tide, so to speak. It fires somewhere between 500 and 600 rounds per minute, I believe, and was manufactured in a few different calibers. But for the sake of this video and the model we are making, I'm just going to assume it's chambered in 303 British, which, again, for this time, firing automatically is definitely no joke. Visually, it's certainly unique. It's very memorable. It's got that very long and large radius kind of barrel shroud. So no, I'll say it right now, that big tube isn't obviously the barrel itself. It's just the metal shroud around the barrel and its cooling fins. Lots of this will make a lot more sense probably during the actual modeling process, but yes, this was an air-cooled machine gun. So its barrel was surrounded by this kind of metal sleeve of thick heat sink fans, really, and then that large opening tube barrel shroud would surround all of that. It's probably best to showcase some of the Lewis machine gun's unique visual aspects in the modeling, so let's just jump right to that and see how we can do. Out of the 3 models, the Lewis machine gun definitely took the longest. At first glance, it looks simple. It's got the big barrel shroud, drum mag, chunky silhouette, but the receiver is deceptively complex. It took me a lot of head scratching to really understand how it all fit together. I started with the stock for a reason. The receiver's back profile has to match the stock's connecting bracket perfectly before the geometry transitions into the receiver's more natural, actual shape. So I built the stock and its bracket first, making sure to include the little insert kind of plug bracket that's at the bottom, and that top slope where the folding sight would eventually sit flush against. With that aligned, I then extruded the receiver's kind of starting profile out from the stock's bracket, and at this stage, it doesn't look anything like the real thing, but I had to start here to work from there into what it actually is supposed to look like. Before shaping the receiver further, though, I switched over to the kind of grip and trigger guard assembly kind of plate solid that's on the bottom of the receiver. By scaling this part accurately from references, I could then use it to double check the receiver's proportions once we start shaping the receiver more properly. So with that now in place, I could return to the receiver and add a new extrusion that's more basic and rectangular after cutting the back part of the receiver with that kind of weird curvy bit, which is part of the real thing that then transitions into the actual shape of the receiver. From there, I added a cylindrical bulge that runs across the whole length of the receiver, and this is because this is where the kind of bolt and barrel operation would be housed or within the receiver, so that's why those edges are bumped out on the real thing and in the model. Next up was one of the more iconic features, the top cover plate that sits behind the drum magazine and handles part of the feeding mechanism. This was a straightforward kind of curve and extrusion work, but getting the proportions right against the receiver was really the most important part. With that in place, I started a first pass on the drum itself. Basically just started as a short cylinder with radial cutouts that are made using an array of cutting tools. Once that was scaled and positioned properly enough for now, it started to feel more like a Lewis machine gun. I then modeled the adjustable rear sight assembly, which lines up both with the top curve of the stock bracket and the plate we just made that's behind the drum. At the bottom of the receiver, I added the circular ratchet housing, which is part of the unique way that the Lewis gun actually cycles. I don't know how it actually works, but I know it's important. It's obviously part of the model, so that's there. Now for the barrel and its cooling system, which is what really makes the Lewis machine gun distinctive. I built the air cooling fins first as a radial kind of profile, leaving gaps on the underside of where I think the bolt or the barrel would go through it, and then extruded it into the long sleeve that it's supposed to be. I then cut into it angled clearances near where it would be close to the drum, and added the circular brackets that run along the barrel shroud. With that done, I tackled the last major challenge challenge, which is the feeding mechanism that's under the drum. I didn't go for a 1-to-1 replica of every tiny component, but I modeled the main visible pieces. The hourglass-like receiver kind of middle part, the central pillar that the drum would kind of sit onto and rotate around, and the flat rotating plate that I believe drives the magazine spinning, as well as the smaller lever to the side of it that, again, I believe guides the rounds into the chamber. I can't claim to fully understand the mechanics, but visually I wanted it to look right and be able to be believable. From there, it was some final detail passes. So the charging handle, the winding gear that's on that underside part, the trigger, and some mechanical fittings and such. I also reworked the drum to remove the bottom base and added support pieces up at the top, and filled every slot with a modeled 303 British cartridge for accuracy. After rounding edges and cleaning things up, finally called the model done and sent it over to Substance Painter for me to do more texturing work. And here it is, the final result for the Lewis machine gun, seen in Peaky Blinders Season 1. While this model took the longest and was definitely the most difficult to get right, seeing it all textured up and showcased in those final renders definitely made it all worth it. While yes, I didn't include every aspect required to make it a historically accurate recreation, I think I put enough detail in to pass that Jonathan Ferguson smell test I mentioned earlier. Or maybe not. Honestly, I'm not sure. I doubt he will ever see my work or my content, so we will most likely never know. But altogether, still a good end result. And there you have it. 3 iconic World War I era weapons seen in Peaky Blinders Season 1, remodeled by yours truly here at NARKdesign. Peaky Blinders is a show that goes to great lengths to ensure the setting and atmosphere is accurately representative of the time period, and the weaponry displayed is no exception. And this theme continues throughout every season of the series, and as time moves on and that gap between the First World War and the Second World War gets smaller with each entry to the series, we get to see how Thomas Shelby, his operation, as well as his enemies, interact with and operate with newer firearms designed during that time period as the years kind of progress. So really an exceptional show for gun nerds all around. And if that piques your interest, let me know if you'd like to see me model and go over the weapons of other series and other seasons of Peaky Blinders as well. Before we go, we want to make sure we thank our curators from Patreon for supporting the channel financially, as well as remind all of you that for only $5 a month on patreon.com/NARKdesign, you can get access to not just the 3 models we created today, but also a growing library of weapon models and 3D game assets in general to be used as you see fit for any of your cool creative projects. And of course, a shout out at the end of every future video for just being so awesome. That's all we have for you guys today. Please make sure to let us know in the comments if there's any firearms or weapons, real or fictional, that you want to see us model and cover in future videos, and drop a like as well while you're at it. Really helps the channel. We appreciate it massively. With all that being said, that's all we have for you guys today. We will see you guys in the next video.